What's up, MetaNerds? This complete life story of Jabba the Hutt will pull from every resource available over the decades. So let's get right into it. Jabba Desilijic Tiure was born in 600 BBY on the planet Nal Hutta. The planet that served as the heart of Hutt power shaped his rise as one of the most infamous crime lords in the galaxy. If you want a complete breakdown on just the Hutt species themselves, be sure to check out the video in the cards. Before getting into his life specifically, there are a few things about Hutt biology that will be crucial to this story, as they played a huge role in his decisions. Hutts move by slithering, much like slugs, using the base of their bodies as a slow-moving foot, and some Hutts grow so large that they become completely immobile. Their skin was incredibly tough, resistant to almost all chemicals, and coated in a sweat made of oil and mucus, which helped them retain moisture even on dry worlds. Even if someone managed to pierce their thick skin, layers of bubble and muscle protected their vital organs, and they were also highly resistant to poisons, disease, and even digestion. Even Sarlaccs, it said, could not fully digest them, and would even spit them back out. One of the more unusual aspects of Hutt biology was their ability to choose their gender at will, and while they had a strong reproductive drive, they had an extremely low fertility rate, likely due to the destruction of their original homeworld, Varl. This led to speculation that Hutts developed the ability to self-impregnate, and because of this, the sex/gender line was really blurred. It could change in some time of crisis, or purely as a matter of personal expression. Because sexual dimorphism was the norm amongst most species in the galaxy, when a Hutt became pregnant, most thought of it as a female, and some would stick with that, like Giliac, who was called a female after getting pregnant, while others like Bopara and Zorba did consider themselves male even though they gave birth. But also Hutts can take mates, like we see with Gorga and Anatro, but Hutts always gave birth to one child at a time and carried them in their brood pouch. It wasn't that they had to self-impregnate, it just seems that evolutionary pressures retained this option, due to that long period when the Hutts were on the brink of extinction. When Hutts are born, they were tiny, blind creatures weighing under 100 grams, instinctively clawing their way into the brood pouch to feed on milk. They stayed there for 50 years, emerging at about 70 kilograms or 154 pounds, and 1 meter or 3.3 feet long, but actually had the intelligence of around a 10-year-old human. So a Hutt 50-year-old is really only like a 10-year-old human. But they didn't have to stay in the brood pouch. We can wonder if Jabba was critiqued for this, but Jabba would take his son Rhoda out of the pouch much earlier, at only around 10 years old, and so mentally it really is closer to like a newborn. But this does start to speed up a bit, and we see that by 80 years old, Jabba had already begun establishing his criminal empire on the remote desert world of Tatooine. In 516 BBY, he moved his operations into an old Ba'omar monastery, using the planet's isolation to solidify his power. He started out as a high-risk gunrunner, working alongside his close friend Elephant Mon. During Senator Palpatine's rise to power, Jabba was one of many gangsters vying for dominance. His rivals included Cisse Fromm, a reigning kingpin of organized crime at that time, and Prince Xizor, an ambitious heir to the Black Sun Empire. While Fromm focused on playing war games, Jabba and Xizor were more strategic. They saw the political landscape shifting and worked to gain favor with the rising powers that would soon reshape the galaxy. Plagueis saw the intel from Jabba as an opportunity to manipulate events in his favor. He hoped to use the information to pull Jedi Master Dooku further toward the dark side, while also helping his apprentice Darth Sidious secure the role of Supreme Chancellor, especially since Senator Ainley Team, one of the conspirators, was a political rival. Jabba later provided another crucial tip, warning Plagueis about an assassination attempt planned by Gardulla, working in tandem with the Bando Gora and Black Sun, all being orchestrated by King Ars Varuna on Naboo, who actually was a former ally of Plagueis, hoping to turn against the secret Sith Lord. But thanks to Jabba's warning, Plagueis escaped an orbital bombardment on Sojourn undetected. Everyone could assume he was killed, while Plagueis was actually rescued by Jabba's yacht, the Star Jewel. And ironically, Jabba had also played a small role in the events leading up to that attempt. Darth Sidious had sent Darth Maul to Coghive 7 prison in order to retrieve a nuclear device from the arms dealer Aram Radek, intending to pass that nuke on to the Bando Gora as the weapon to be used against Plagueis. When Jabba attacked the prison with the Star Jewel, Maul was able to escape with help from Kamari Vosa, eventually handing the nuclear device over to her. So Jabba inadvertently actually facilitated the nuclear attack on Plagueis, but he wasn't actually involved in that plot against the Sith Lord, and was there to warn and rescue him. By 32 BBY, the Naboo crisis reached its peak. Jabba and Gardulla met before that year's Boonta Eve Classic pod race. Gardulla had gone all out, presenting a full model of the track and even boasting a machine that could predict the winner. The machine showed Gascano as the victor, while Jabba's astromech R5X2 predicted that Sebulba would take the first place, with Gascano in second and Mahonic in third. But strangely enough, even the droid had some interest in the enslaved human Anakin Skywalker, something that no one else predicted. On the day of the race, Jabba played host to Gardulla in his VIP box at the Mos Espa Grand Arena, where he received wild cheers upon his arrival. To signal the start of the race, he theatrically spat a gorg into the starting gong, but his lack of genuine interest in the sport showed when he fell asleep during the event, needing Bib Fortuna to wake him up at the end. To his satisfaction, Anakin had won the race, meaning that unexpected droid tip-off to this side bet paid off enormously, while Gardulla was stunned and embarrassed. Around this same time, in the Jinlan Wastes, Gardulla hatched a plan to rally her criminal forces to wipe out the Tusken Raiders by hiring the deadly bounty hunter Aurra Sing to assassinate their Jedi leader Sharad Het. Meanwhile, Jabba had his own scheme in motion, sending his thugs to raid Tusken camps, provoking them into retaliatory attacks on the local settlers. He then intended to cash in by selling overpriced surplus weapons from Dredden's stockpile, as the civilians were desperately scrambling to get arms. Essentially price gouging during a crisis he manufactured, which was costing the lives of Tuskens and settlers, perpetuating the hatred towards these two groups. Gardulla's plan ultimately failed, forcing her to retreat to her palace on Mos Espa, and this marked one of her final clashes with Jabba. Eventually, the rivalry between these Hutts came to a breaking point. Tatooine was too small to share between these two enormous slugs. Wanting her permanently removed, Jabba granted an audience to Jango Fett, who had recently earned favor with the Hutt after bringing in the bounty on Longo 2 guns. Jabba hired Fett to eliminate Gardulla once and for all, and when Fett returned, Jabba was delighted to hear that she had been devoured by her own pet crate dragon, though he was surprised when Jango never came to collect his bounty. He later learned why. Jango had been decapitated by Jedi Master Mace Windu during the Battle of Geonosis, but Jabba would go on to conduct business with Jango's clone son, Boba. The execution of one of his favorite bounty hunters coincided with the start of the Clone Wars, and Jabba found himself in an unusual position, siding with the Galactic Republic, those goody two-shoes who had long plagued the Hutt Empire. Following the Republic's recapture of Serapin, a major energy hub, Jabba became involved in the Second Battle of Tatooine.
Zeon Finis, the captured Confederacy officer, had pointed Ichu to Tatooine, an outer rim world that was a nest of outlaws and pirates. The Hutt cartel was not a group to be trifled with, and somehow I knew they would be involved with the Confederacy in their treachery.
His newest rival, Borka the Hutt, had aligned himself with the Confederacy of Independent Systems, and Jabba decided that Borka had crossed the line. When the Republic's newly deployed clone forces on Tatooine proved too small to mount a full assault on the Confederacy's base, Jabba saw an opportunity and stepped in to tip the balance. After reinforcing their troops, Jedi Generals Ichu Shenjan and Na'at Reith took the fight to the Separatists, eventually defeating Borka the Hutt. Jabba was on a rival killing spree, and so he rewarded them with 5,000 Nova Crystals. But being the savvy crime boss he was, Jabba didn't limit his business to just one side of the war. He of course saw opportunities for profit on both sides. When Wat Tambor, one of the highest-ranking members of the Separatist Council and head of the Techno Union, reached out to Jabba, they made an agreement to smuggle large shipments of construction materials and cortosis to Metalorn. This would be used for the production of CB-3 cortosis battle droids, but his dealings with the Separatists didn't stay under wraps for long. Republic informant Rala Ponchar found out about Jabba's involvement, but before she could report back, she was captured by battle droids under the command of the Dark Acolyte Sato and locked away in Jabba's palace. When the Jedi Council noticed her disappearance, they sent Anakin to investigate, and Jabba, tipped off by Aurra Sing, quickly put a bounty on Anakin's head, hoping to get rid of the young Jedi before he uncovered anything. Even with the bounty hunters coming after him, Anakin managed to break into the palace, free Ponchar, and take down Sato before passing the evidence of Jabba's involvement to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Around this same time, Jango Fett's clone son, Boba Fett, came across his father's journal, which led him to seek out Jabba. But before he could reach the Hutt, he had a run-in with the deadly separatist commander Dirge. But after escaping, Boba eventually did find himself working for Jabba. The Hutt was more than happy to take him in, not only because of Boba's skills, but in the odd morality of these thug slugs. He did feel a responsibility to repay the favor Jango had done for him years earlier by eliminating Gardulla. Though Boba worked for Jabba, he also had his own separate plans, maintaining ties with the Separatists and Count Dooku, while of course carving out his own reputation. But as the Clone Wars progressed, Jabba found himself needing the Jedi's help. His son Rhoda had been kidnapped, and in exchange for help, Jabba offered the Republic safe passage through Hutt-controlled space. A crucial advantage since the Separatists controlled most major hyperlanes in the Outer Rim. Jabba had already sent bounty hunters to track down his son, but they returned empty-handed and beheaded. Count Dooku and the Confederacy had actually orchestrated the kidnapping, allowing the Jedi to rescue Rhoda while manipulating the situation to make it look like they were the kidnappers. But when this plan backfired and the Jedi did return his son, they ultimately earned Jabba's trust, securing his support for the Republic against the Confederacy, while being furious at finding out that the real mastermind behind the scheme was his own uncle, Zero Desilijic Tiure, as there was no peacetime in Hutt politics. No time that you would be without a rival, even if it was your own uncle. Later, Baron Noltulwiski Papanoida, chairman of the Pandoran Assembly, came to Jabba for help in tracking down his kidnapped daughters, Chi-Ikwe and Cheamanwi. Papanoida demanded a blood sample to prove Greedo's involvement. Jabba allowed it, and once the test confirmed the match, Greedo immediately confessed that he had been working with the Separatists. He then led the Pantorans to Mos Eisley, where one of the girls was being held. In another incident, Jabba hired bounty hunter Cad Bane to get intel on the Senate building. After Bane's success, Jabba and the Hutt Council debated whether to release Zero from prison. Ultimately, they hired Bane to break him out.
Oh, I have no illusions about the fact that my escape was a result of the highly sensitive knowledge that I possess. A hollow diary cataloging the nefarious deeds of this council.
But later, Jabba turned on Zero, sending Sai Snoodles to retrieve incriminating information on him. And just through personal reasons, Sai would end up betraying and killing Zero before handing Jabba the Diary of the Hutts. By 20 BBY, Darth Maul and his brother Savage Opress and Pre Vizsla of Death Watch confronted the Hutt ruling council on Nal Hutta. Their demands were clear and bold. The Mandalorians would let them live if they handed over all of Hutt territory. Jabba and the other elders laughed off this demand and instead sent bounty hunters after them. While Gorga and Jabba monitored the situation via hologram, all the other Hutts managed to escape except for Aruba. Soon after this, Maul and his forces launched an assault on Jabba's palace on Tatooine, storming the monastery, and they eventually reached the throne room, where Maul and his allies forced Jabba and Gorga into submission, bringing the mighty crime lord under the control of the Shadow Collective. Jabba relied on a number of lieutenants to help him manage his ever-expanding criminal empire, but none were as important as his major domo, Narun Kuthis. He respected Kuthis more than most, but there was a huge problem. Kuthis knew too much. He couldn't risk letting him retire, so instead, he granted him a swift death as a final reward for his service. With Kuthis gone, a power struggle broke out between Bib Fortuna and a human smuggler named Bidlo Corve, each vying for that coveted position of Jabba's right-hand man. As much as people critique the Hutts, their corruption does serve as a mirror, seeing the worst things that could be brought out of people, even when they can see how detrimental it is to themselves. Everyone who became a spice dealer knew other dealers that were killed. Spice users had seen plenty of spice addicts. And these two men knew that Kuthis had been killed by Jabba, yet still, due to the prestige and credits, they would do anything to become Jabba's right-hand man. And enjoying this rivalry, Jabba played them up against each other. When Jabba received his new pet Rancor, he decided to make a spectacle of this competition. Corve became the creature's first public meal, and Fortuna simply won the position by default. A real twisted look into Jabba's psychology, and that he wanted to be utterly unpredictable and cruel, sometimes basing a promotion off of service and loyalty, other times just casually ending someone's life, just to show how little it all meant to him, whether it be these coveted titles people scrambled over, or even life itself. Jabba's father, Zorba, was arrested and sentenced to prison on Kip for illegal gemstone mining. When a bribery attempt to free him failed, Jiliak took control of the Desilijic clan, which made Jabba next in line for leadership over the entire cartel. Now, of course, Jabba was always hiring bounty hunters, but one of his favorite was a Gand named Zuckuss. Over the years, Zuckuss completed many high-profile jobs for Jabba, earning a strong reputation in the Crime Lord's inner circle. Eventually, Jabba suggested that Zuckuss team up with Forlom, a protocol droid that had been modified by Jabba's workers with upgraded programming. The two proved to be a highly effective team, and they became regulars at the palace. And it was around this same time that the Clone Wars came to an end, and we see the rise of the Galactic Empire. The Hutt Empire is one of the longest in galactic history, so although it might seem weird, this wasn't that big a deal to them. It was business as usual. You're still paying off whoever's in charge at the local level, whether they have a republic or an imperial emblem on their fancy hat. At least, that's how it usually went, but Jabba was outraged to see that he had an imperial bounty on his head. There's two ways to look at this. Either Palpatine was trying to completely consolidate power, but that seems a little tactless and inconsistent with his actions later. It's most likely that he knew that by killing the famous Jabba, it would be a great PR stunt, showing that he was fighting crime and maintaining peace, but he also knew enough about Hutt politics to know that some other Hutt would just step in. And when that new slug spread more chaos, they would need Big Palpy's government to come in and save the day again. The Empire actually needs some level of crime and even rebellion. It works as a foil to make themselves look better. But whatever the case, Jabba did not stop his criminal dealings. He even had a major conflict in 15 BBY when rival crime lord C.C. Fromm and his son Tig tried to develop a devastating new weapon, the satellite called Trigon 1. This satellite supposedly had enough firepower to destroy planets, and the Fromm gang planned to use it to force other cartels, including Jabba's, into submission. But the plan fell apart when a speeder racer named Thal Jobin, with help from R2-D2, destroyed this superweapon before it could be deployed, with that little droid always happening to pop up in galactic history just in time to be a conduit for the Force's will. And seeing an opportunity to crush the Fromm gang while they were still recovering from the loss of their massive investment, Jabba put a bounty on them, and it was Boba Fett who initially found them, as C.C. Fromm had hired him to capture Jobin and his friends, hoping to get revenge. Fett accepted the job as a favor to the Elder Fromm, who had helped him in the past, but the chase went badly for Fett, who lost his speeder, his droid, and nearly his life, and furious, he decided his debts to the Fromms had been settled and instead turned them over to Jabba.
Blunder! Your meddling has cost me my droid, my speeder, and almost my neck, Tig Fromm.
C.C. survived only by cutting a deal that heavily favored Jabba. He handed over a massive cut of the Fromm family's profits and pledged his army of Anudak clones to help Jabba eliminate the remnants of the Mandalorian Death Watch, with whom he still had a score to settle. Then, about 5 years before the Battle of Yavin, Jabba took his yacht, Star Jewel, to pay a visit to an old acquaintance, Gar Sapoon. Once he arrived, he casually informed Gar that there was a bomb somewhere in his palace. The Galactic Empire set Kosh Corp to investigate, but no bomb was found, and the situation escalated into a heated trade war, during which Jabba outmaneuvered Gar at every turn. This drove Gar to the point of madness where he attempted to kill him, but Jabba responded by releasing a highly venomous Tromonid, which immediately bit his would-be assassin. Now poisoned, Gar had no choice but to negotiate. Jabba dangled the antidote in front of him, demanding everything they had traded in return. When Gar, still clinging to his pride, reminded Jabba about the supposed bomb and dared him to detonate it, Jabba simply played along, keeping the upper hand as always. Things took a turn for the worse when Jabba casually called Gar by his real name, Sinopu Bomor. That name meant something to Kosh Kurp, the Imperial investigator, who immediately realized Bomor was the man who killed his family. Without hesitation, Kurp fired a blaster shot at him. The shot ricocheted and blew Gar's head apart. At that moment, Kurp realized the awful truth. He was the bomb all along, manipulated by Jabba into taking revenge on the Hutt's behalf, showing the Hutts could be cruel, but often unexpectedly clever. As Jabba's crew left the planet aboard Star Jewel, Scoopa, the ship's captain, spotted a Nuffin freighter that seemed like an easy target, and thinking it was full of valuable cargo, Jabba, Bib Fortuna, and 2 Weequay guards boarded the ship, leaving a Gamorrean guard behind to watch Star Jewel. But things didn't go as planned. The group was ambushed and captured by the ship's owner, Princess Nampi. She threw the guards and Bib into the larder, keeping Jabba and Scoopa for a personal audience. Jabba refused to give up his fortune, so Nampi had him locked up too. Scoopa, sensing this opportunity, realized he now controlled Jabba's finances and tried to save himself by agreeing to marry Nampi. But what he didn't realize until it was too late was that Nampi's species devoured the male on their wedding night. He went from her husband to her appetizer in a matter of moments. When Jabba was summoned to be the main course, he quickly sized up this situation and turned it to his advantage. You see, these slug thugs really are creative, and being so long-lived, they're used to planning out things over a long period. And years before this, Jabba had implanted a remote-controlled device in Scoopa's skull that could release xenoboric acid if he ever betrayed him. Now holding all the power, Jabba offered Nampi a deal: hand over her wealth, or he would activate the device. When she refused, he pushed the button without a second thought, and within seconds, she exploded. Once the mess was cleared, Jabba freed Bib and the guards, and they looted Nampi's treasure hold. Amused by the carnage, Jabba even joked that Bib should, quote, wear his boots as he trudged into the remains. Jabba then planned to sell Nampi's ship to Crime Lord Cabrul Num, but there was still the matter of her remaining crew. Bib suggested selling them into slavery, but Jabba had a more twisted idea, launching them into space, quote, just to see 'em pop. When Jabba met with Num, the meeting started off well, but things soured when they began arguing over a contract hit. Num wanted Jabba to assassinate his rival, Vu Chusker, but Jabba wasn't interested, and annoyed, Num had Jabba locked in a spare room. But Num's son, Rusk, saw an opportunity and secretly hired Jabba to kill his own father instead. Jabba happily took this job, suffocating Num in his sleep. With Num dead, Jabba assumed he would take Rusk on as a business partner, but Rusk had other plans. He double-crossed Jabba, throwing him into the deep hold, and there, Jabba met another member of the Num family, Rusk's sister, Norba, who also wanted her brother dead. Always looking for opportunities, Jabba agreed to this too, and together they were able to escape and crush Rusk in his own office. But this family was so backstabbing they even impressed the Hutt. Norba wasn't looking for an ally either. She immediately had Jabba thrown back into the deep hold, and later when she came to gloat, she told Jabba she wanted Vu Chusker dead. Amused, Jabba leaned against the bars and told her to come closer, and as soon as she did, he lunged forward, dragging her into his mouth and ate her alive. Never underestimate a Hutt. With her out of the way, he took her keys and escaped, and while making his way out, Jabba ran into none other than Vu Chusker himself. Just to throw off everyone, without wasting time, he smashed Chusker into the ground before floating back to his ship on a repulsor sled. In hindsight, he thought to himself that he just should have killed Chusker in the first place. By the time Jabba returned to his palace, his majordomo Bib Fortuna had hatched plans to overthrow him. Bib had recruited 6 disgruntled minions, including Nivik, to torture information out of his guards and eventually kill them. But just as they began to execute their plan, 2 of Jabba's guards, Graum and Maramba, unleashed a pack of vicious Frekkers, and the palace erupted in chaos. Bib and his co-conspirators managed to kill the creatures, which ironically made Jabba see him as a loyal hero. And all of Bib's co-conspirators died in this fight, so the failed coup was buried along with them, and Bib was the only one who knew how close he came to treason, with his ambition tamed, at least for now. And Jabba's rise to power got a boost when he and his great-uncle Jiliak took interest in a young, cocky smuggler named Han Solo. Pressed by Han's skills, they hired him to run spices across the galaxy, making big profits off the illegal spice trade. Han proved himself quickly, and was soon trusted with high-risk jobs like the infamous Kessel Run. What Han didn't know at the time was that Jabba and Jiliak were preparing a major power move against the rival Basadi clan, specifically targeting their spice refining operations on Ylesia. While running a shipment for the Desilijic clan, Han barely escaped a vicious pirate attack, which he then blamed on the Basadi. Outraged, Oryk the Hutt, the leader of the Basadi clan, and his son Durga demanded a hearing before the Hutt Council on Nal Hutta, and that council ultimately ruled in favor of the Basadi, clearing them of any wrongdoing. But that wasn't enough for Jabba and Jiliak. They decided Oryk had to die. They contacted High Priest Torienza of Ylesia and arranged for a deadly Malkite poison to take him out. The plan worked, but soon after the Hutts faced an even bigger threat, run-in with Imperials. Moff Sarshield declared a crackdown on Nal Hutta and Nar Shaddaa, putting the Hutt criminal empire at risk. When bribery failed, Jabba and Jiliak turned to Han Solo, telling him to buy off the Imperial admiral leading the assault. And Han did pull this off. even securing the Empire's battle plans. Meanwhile, the Hutts hired Drea Renthal's mercenary fleet to reinforce Nalhutta, and with the smugglers and mercenaries working together, and armed with this stolen Imperial strategy, the defenders of Nar Shaddaa pulled off a shocking victory, forcing the Empire to back off and allowing the Hutts to keep their hold on the Outer Rim. Not long after, Oric's son Durga started piecing things together and suspected Jiliak of orchestrating his father's assassination. Under old law, he challenged Jiliak's right to rule, and in the ensuing duel, killed him. While most beings would have been shaken by the loss of a close ally, especially when you live so long, Jabba saw nothing but opportunity. Without hesitation, he murdered Jiliak's now orphaned child, eliminating any future competition and cementing himself as the uncontested leader of the Desilijic Tiure. At this point, Jabba was at the height of his power, a time when the Hutts had just defeated the Empire, and so now he had better eyes on how everything ran within this Tiure. Jabba's main source of spice was a Rimbit named Morath Dul, who had a talent for recruiting competent smugglers, and he made their whole operation run smoothly. Dul had no loyalty beyond credits, and he worked with Han Solo and Chewbacca many times, but also wouldn't hesitate to sell them out if the price was high. And that's exactly what happened when Dul tipped off Imperial authorities about a spice run Solo was making for Jabba, leading to an Imperial patrol intercepting the cargo. At first, Jabba blamed Han entirely for the lost shipment, holding him responsible for this massive financial hit. But over time, he started to suspect Dul was skimming spice from the operation. And when Jabba finally confirmed Dul's betrayal, he put a bounty on him, and knowing he was a marked man, Dul staged a prison revolt on Kessel, hoping to cause enough chaos to cover his tracks. And his plan worked. Half the prison guards were secretly on his payroll, and it made this takeover relatively easy. But in the end, he was caught and dragged before Jabba. Begging for mercy, Dul bargained for his life, even offering one of his eyes as payment. And Jabba was so amused, he accepted this trade. With Dul punished, the never-predictable Jabba went to place the full blame of the lost cargo back on Solo. By 0 BBY, in the official beginning of the Galactic Civil War, Jabba had cemented himself as the most powerful crime lord in the Outer Rim, and likely in the entire galaxy. His near monopoly on the glitter stem spice trade gave him immense wealth and influence, and under his leadership, the Desilijic Tiure had become the most dominant Hutt dynasty, overtaking all of their long-term rivals. But even at the peak of his power, he faced ongoing problems. Chronic illness left him in constant discomfort, and of course there was constant plotting against him by his own lieutenants. The only ones he truly trusted were his Nimbanal accountant Mosip Benid and Elephant Mon, whom he had appointed as his chief of security at the palace. And he still just couldn't get over what a massive financial hit Han Solo had given to his empire, dumping that massive shipment of glitter stem, all just to save his own neck from Imperial customs. And he could have paid the right people to make sure that that spice disappeared from the evidence lockers. But Solo dumped it all into space. It was long scattered across the stars. And after he gave the human numerous chances to pay him back, Jabba eventually put a bounty on his head.
Solo?
Yes, Greedo. As a matter of fact, I was just going to see your boss. Tell Jabba that I've got his money.
Greedo attempted to collect it, but Han shot him dead first. And not long after, Jabba personally confronted Han in the Millennium Falcon's hangar bay. But rather than outright kill him, he gave Han a chance to settle the debt by adding a 15% premium to the original sum. Before leaving, Jabba warned him that if he delayed this payment again, he'd put a bounty so large on him that he wouldn't be able to set foot in a civilized system.
Jabba, you're a wonderful human being.
After the Battle of Yavin, rumors spread that Jabba had been one of the key figures funding the Imperial Dark Trooper project, providing smuggling ships to the Empire, which were used to keep this thing a secret even from most Imperials. His men were also hunting Kyle Katarn on behalf of General Rom Mak, but Katarn and Jan Ors managed to eliminate the mercenaries chasing them. But as they were leaving Nar Shaddaa, Jabba's forces captured their ship, the Moldy Crow, and threw them into the Star Jewel, intending to feed them to his Kell dragons. Katarn managed to escape, and this didn't really seem to faze Jabba. A few days later, Han attempted to settle his debt by giving Jabba 500,000 credits worth of an ancient Sith treasure. He accepted, but noted that this wasn't enough, and he kept the bounty on Han's head. But for a brief time, Jabba actually forgave Han of his debt when Solo saved Mosip Benid, that man that was crucial to his operation, and Han even completed another Kessel run for Jabba. But peace didn't last long. When Mosip found the wreckage of Crimson Jack's ship, which Jabba had helped to build, and discovered that Han played a role in its destruction, Jabba was furious with him again and reinstated the bounty. In the years following the Battle of Yavin, Jabba found himself in a fierce turf war with Lady Valerian and her criminal organization, which was also based on Tatooine. At one point, Lady Valerian sent a team of elite off-world assassins to kill him, but Jabba got wind of the plot and had his men ambush and kill Valerian's assassins during the assault on her strategic command bunker. Remember, the Hutts are always playing the long game, and it was actually years earlier, before the Battle of Yavin, that Jabba entered a business deal with the weapons dealer Tiber Zahn. But neither man saw the partnership as anything more than temporary. When Tiber learned that Jabba had purchased a rare artifact at an exorbitant price, he decided to strike, and took a team of mercenaries to Felucia, where Jabba was meeting with Imperial buyers. Tiber managed to steal the artifact, but was captured in the process, and while imprisoned, he sent a transmission to Jabba, taunting him and claiming that he had sent an assassin to kill him. But Tiber's ally, Uri Fen, broke him out, and Tiber went on to form the Zahn Consortium, forever vowing revenge against Jabba. One of the most notable clashes between Jabba and the Consortium was the Battle of Hypori. Using a listening post on Seleucami, Jabba pinpointed the Consortium's key bases and sent saboteurs to destroy them. At first he was successful, but Tiber quickly retaliated, tracking down Jabba's droid factory on Hypori and launching a full-scale assault. The battle turned against Jabba when Bossk, lured over by triple the pay, betrayed him and joined Tiber. Meanwhile, Uri Fen hacked into Jabba's Droideka Mark II droids, turning them against their master, and with Jabba's forces overwhelmed, Tiber forced him to agree to a ceasefire that granted the Zahn Consortium control of Seleucami and Hypori, and in exchange, Jabba was forced to call off the bounty on Tiber's head. Now, after the Battle of Hoth, Darth Vader sent an agent named Jix to spy on Jabba while also keeping an eye on Luke Skywalker. Posing as a mercenary looking for work, Jix ended up in front of Jabba after being picked up by Swoop gang leader Big Giz. Meanwhile, Jabba received word that Luke was now worth more dead than alive. Though Jix, confused, had been under the impression that Vader wanted Luke alive. When the Swoop gang leader ambushed Luke, Jix stopped Giz from killing him by knocking him out with a rock. Luke quickly took care of the rest of the gang, while another swooper escaped with Jix. Jabba was both furious and intrigued. He suspected that Jix was more than he claimed to be. After all, the swoopers were far too dumb to have turned on him on their own. At the same time, he was preoccupied with Boba Fett's arrival, as the bounty hunter was now bringing in Han Solo, frozen in carbonite, seeking to collect that reward. Jabba got even more suspicious about Jix when one of his aides caught him tampering with security codes. Jix killed the aide, took the security key, and transmitted a message to Vader. It was just when Jabba was beginning to investigate the murder that Boba Fett arrived. Of course, he had to try and undercut Fett by offering a reward of 5,000 credits to anyone who could bring him Solo first, but Fett was still holding onto his prize by the time he presented it, and Jabba grudgingly paid the bounty. With Solo now in his possession, Jabba's palace became a haven for bounty hunters, and this became a grand celebration. Bossk and Fett stayed for the duration of Han's captivity, but Zuckuss did eventually leave to go on a hunt. With Solo frozen in carbonite and his status as Tatooine's ruler unquestioned, Jabba indulged in an increasingly extravagant lifestyle. One of his most outrageous expenditures was an enormous, no-rules vehicular demolition event, a spectacle filled with death, destruction, and a massive betting pool. The tournament attracted a wide variety of contestants, from high-profile names like Boba Fett and the Doug pod racer Pugwis, to unexpected entries like the Jawa warlord Witten. Others like the Wookiee mechanic Quagga and the deserting Imperial General Otto all joined out of their desperate need for credits. Some, like bounty hunter Aurra Sing, entered for revenge, while others like Tamtel Screech, who was actually Lando Calrissian in disguise, and Malakili, the Rancor Keeper, were just there to impress Jabba and climb the ranks. And not all participants were willing. There were 2 rebel pilots, Tia and Gia, along with Alderaanian smuggler Wade Vox, who were forced into the tournament against their will. And Jabba raked in an obscene amount of credits from the betting, celebrating yet another victory. But just as he was basking in his fortune, 2 droids arrived, carrying a message that would change everything. Jabba was thrilled to have Han Solo as his personal trophy, hanging the carbon-frozen smuggler in his audience chamber as his favorite decoration. But the Rebel Alliance wasn't about to let Han stay in Jabba's clutches. They came up with a complex rescue plan, starting with Luke sending R2-D2 and C-3PO to Jabba's palace with a message and his gifts. The droids were escorted past the Gamorrean guards and delivered Luke's request to negotiate for Han's release. Jabba was amused, but immediately rejected it and put the droids to work instead. That day, Jabba indulged in entertainment listening to the Max Rebo Band perform Jedi Rocks while watching his enslaved Twi'lek dancer Ula. When he demanded an encore and tried to pull Ula toward him, she resisted, but unbothered by anyone's suffering, he simply pressed a button on his throne, opening a trapdoor beneath her and sending her straight to his Rancor, who was just the latest of countless souls sacrificed to this beast. Right after that, Princess Leia arrived, but of course described as the bounty hunter Bosch, with Chewbacca playing the role of a prisoner. Jabba and the disguised Leia haggled over Chewie's bounty, but when she pulled out a thermal detonator and threatened to use it, the Hutt was impressed by her boldness. They settled on 35,000 credits, and Jabba had Chewbacca thrown into the dungeon, while Bosch remained in place, waiting for the perfect moment. In the chaos caused by her arrival, several prisoners from Jabba's demolition games, including Alderaanian smuggler Wade Vox and the rebel twins Tia and Gia, they did manage to escape. And later that night, Leia snuck into Jabba's chambers and freed Han from his carbonite prison. But Jabba had sniffed out the betrayal, and Han, still weak from hibernation sickness, tried to talk his way out of it, but Jabba mocked him, saying it was too late for that. He had Han thrown in a cell with Chewbacca and turned his attention to Leia. And now that Ula was gone, Jabba decided to replace her by enslaving Leia. Ignoring her threats, he had his guards bring her to him, licking her face in a disgusting display of dominance. As the Max Rebo Band played, Jabba's dancers dressed Leia in a revealing Huttese slave outfit, placing a collar and chain around her neck to keep her bound to his throne. And all this time, and like always, plots to assassinate Jabba were brewing inside the palace. Jaquil, secretly working for Lady Valarian, managed to get his hands on Leia's thermal detonator, only for Bib Fortuna to steal it from him. Tessic had planted a bomb on Jabba's sail barge, while Reis was plotting his own attack, unaware that Jabba had implanted a short-range explosive inside him that could be detonated with a single phrase. At one point, Jabba decided to send Leia to Boba Fett's quarters as a gift. Fett, though uninterested, chose not to return her right away, knowing that sending her back too soon might anger Jabba and lead her to being fed to the Rancor. And as the hours passed, Jabba's paranoia was growing. He suspected that his chef, Porcellus, was trying to hex him through his food, but he had secretly been cooking meals for Han, trying to help him recover from hibernation sickness. When Leia tried to prove Porcellus's innocence by eating a sample of the sand maggot kidneys Jabba had been served, she became nauseated, as the dish was completely indigestible for humans. And this just got a great laugh out of Jabba, entertained by her misery. A few days later, Luke finally arrived at Jabba's palace. Most of the court was asleep when he entered, but Bib Fortuna, under the influence of a Jedi mind trick, brought him straight to Jabba's throne room. Luke demanded Han and Chewbacca's release. Jabba would be killed if he refused. The Hutt laughed off the threat. When Luke used the Force to pull a guard's blaster into his hand, Jabba reacted by springing another trap, dropping Luke and an unfortunate Gamorrean named Jubnuk into the Rancor pit. Jabba and his court roared with laughter as the Rancor quickly devoured the terrified Jubnuk. Then it turned its attention to Luke. The Jedi managed to survive by bashing its claw with a rock, ramming a bone into its mouth, and darting between its legs to reach the back of the lair. There he would find the skull of Bidlo Corvée. The Force worked in mysterious ways, and this man who was long ago callously killed by Jabba ended up providing the skull that would be used to trigger the heavy gate to slam down on the Rancor's head. The laughter in Jabba's throne room fell silent. Furious over the death of his prized pet, Jabba lashed out, choking Leia in anger before ordering his guards to bring the remaining rebels before him. Mara Jade was at Jabba's palace under orders from Emperor Palpatine, described as the dancer Arika, with the secret mission of assassinating Luke Skywalker. Ironically, this is the man she would later marry and join in the new Jedi Order. Jabba's security officer Melina Karnas grew suspicious of her, convinced that she was planning to assassinate the Hutt, and attempted to have her imprisoned. Though she failed, her interference made it impossible for Mara to carry out her mission. As payback for the death of his pet, Jabba declared, through C-3PO's translation, that Luke, Han Solo, and Chewbacca would be taken to the Great Pit of Carkoon and fed to the Sarlacc. Leia was the only one spared, as Jabba still had other plans for her, and after the prisoners were taken away, Jabba also sentenced his chef, Porcellus, to death, believing that Ula and Jubnuk's deaths after eating his food. In this utterly degenerated mind of Jabba at this point, he somehow saw the horrible fates of Ula and Jubnuk, their bad luck, as being proof that his meals were hexed. That even though he facilitated their death, it was because he was sort of manipulated by these mysterious forces. Before boarding his sail barge Katana, Jabba was approached by the head of security and his only real friend, Elephant Mon. Having spoken with Luke in the dungeons, Mon had sensed the power of the Force within him and tried to convince Jabba to let him go. But Jabba refused to listen, and with that, Mon chose not to accompany him to Carkoon, effectively ending their decades-long friendship over the return of a Jedi. And while Jabba and his entourage traveled aboard Katana, the prisoners were transported to their execution on a smaller skiff. Leia tried to warn her friends through a window, but Jabba eventually forced her to return to him, pulling him closer on his throne. He smugly told her that in time she would learn to appreciate him and made her drink from his goblet. Once they arrived at the pit, Jabba mockingly offered the prisoners a chance to beg for mercy, but Luke instead issued one final warning. Jabba again laughed it off and ordered them thrown in the Sarlacc. And just as Luke was about to be dropped in, R2-D2, who had been working aboard the sail barge, launched Luke's hidden lightsaber from a compartment in his dome. Luke caught it midair and immediately attacked the skiff guards, throwing Jabba's court into chaos, and amid the panic, Leia shorted the lighting system, momentarily distracting Jabba. Seizing the opportunity, she leapt over Jabba's tail, whipped her chain around his massive neck, and began strangling him. Desperately, Jabba triggered a hypnotic command implanted in Ree-Yees, hoping to force him into grabbing Leia and self-destructing. But before Ree-Yees could act, Jabba collapsed, dead at Leia's hands. Freed from her restraints by R2, Leia met Luke on the top deck of Katana, where he had her aim the deck gun at the ship's interior. It ignited a massive explosion that tore through the barge, and the rebels escaped on one of the skiffs as Katana was consumed in flames, turning the once mighty Jabba the Hutt's luxurious vessel into his funeral pyre. With Jabba gone, chaos engulfed his criminal empire. In Mos Eisley, two low-level criminals, Kes Dallas and Kisa Shaki, tried to take over his smuggling operations, triggering a violent gang war. And within a week of Jabba's death, a group of 4 war droids known as the Mos Eisley Mourners were activated and began hunting down anyone they identified as responsible for his downfall. Jabba's death also had unexpected benefits. Many of those who owed him massive debts were suddenly free of them, earning Luke a surprising amount of goodwill from the underworld. But of course, not everyone saw this as a good thing. Jabba's father, Zorba the Hutt, had been recently freed from prison, and he put a bounty on Leia in retaliation. This bounty was later extended to Han, Chewbacca, and Luke, and it wasn't until Leia became Chief of State of the New Republic that the Hutts finally withdrew the bounty, not wanting to provoke the galactic government any further. Luke's role in Jabba's death made him, and by extension all Jedi of the later order that he would found, the constant enemy of the Hutts. Kappa, along with many other Hutt leadership, would hold this grudge for years, eventually turning against Mara Jade specifically and the New Republic. And they vowed to be tough on crime, though I'm sure the Hutts were used to hearing this. Jabba's nephew, Gorga the Hutt, arrived at his late uncle's palace hoping to claim part of his inheritance, and he was given a small statue of a Hutt, which just looked like a minor trinket, but it actually contained the key to Jabba's secret treasure hoard. But Gorga wasn't the only one after Jabba's legacy. Spiker, who had somehow survived his encounter with Han Solo, Boba Fett, and Big Giz, who had also managed to live through his clash with Jix and Luke, returned after Jabba's death, and there became something of a legendary treasure hut in the sands of Tatooine. But the trap was a pre-recorded message from Jabba himself. He had anticipated that Giz would still be alive and attempt to steal from him. As the security system self-destructed, it nearly killed these bikers, forcing them to flee. And as a final insult to Gorga, Spiker and Giz dropped Jabba's funeral urns directly onto him and his henchmen, shattering them in the process. And his story comes to an end, leaving a very surprising legacy. If you remember, he had secretly helped the Empire with the Darksaber project, and while scavenging his abandoned palace on Tatooine, agents of Durga the Hutt's Basadi clan, his most intense rivals, recovered access codes to former Imperial databases on Coruscant, and using these codes, they retrieved schematics for the Death Star. Complete schematics in every way. In theory, they could construct their own superweapon. And so while tangentially and without even knowing it, Jabba had left behind one last and what could be the greatest contribution to the Hutt Empire in the entirety of its thousands of years of history. But that's it for the complete life of Jabba the Hutt. If you made it this far, please hit that like button. It really does help me out. Subscribe so you don't miss anything. But most important of all, remember, Jabba the Hutt is a timeless archetype, and many are eager to serve him, and the Force will be with you, always.